pause in the fighting. Netanyahu said there is no deal on the table and he cannot elaborate further. According to reports, Hamas is ready to release 60 to 70 hostages. They demand a 5-day ceasefire. However, Israel is against this idea, as it claims Hamas will use the ceasefire to regroup.
ونقول للاحتلال الذي تجاوزت خسائره 180 دبابة وناقلة جند وآلية عسكرية ومئات القتلى والجرحى في صفوف جنوده وضباطه خلال أسبوعين فقط. نحن لازلنا في بداية المعركة ولازلنا في أول الطريق وأول الشوط، وإن القادم بإذن الله أكبر وأعظم.
Families of the hostages continue to apply pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister for their release. Thousands of marchers, including relatives of more than 50 hostages held by Hamas, reached the Prime Minister's office on Saturday. However, on Friday, they had embarked on their fourth leg of a 5-day walk from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and called on the Israeli government to bring some 240 hostages home. The marchers traversed 70 kilometers to Netanyahu's office and urged Israel's war cabinet to do more to rescue their loved ones. Earlier in the war, Qatar negotiated a deal with Hamas to free 2 American-Israeli hostages. A few days later, the militants released 2 elderly Israeli women, but since then, nothing substantial has happened.
Israeli forces have continued bombardment of the Gaza Strip to achieve its vow to annihilate Hamas after the 7th of October attack. Airstrikes have been accompanied with ground offensives since the 27th of October, and now the offensive could extend to areas in South Gaza.
שעובר, פוחתים המקומות שבהם מחבלי החמאס יכולים להסתובב. מי שהיה בצד המערבי של העיר מבין זאת היטב, הוא כבר פגש את עוצמתו הקטלנית של צה"ל. מי שנמצא בצד המזרחי מבין זאת הערב ויבין זאת בימים הקרובים. וגם מי שנמצא בדרומה של רצועת עזה יבין זאת בקרוב.
Meanwhile, relentless shelling has continued in South Gaza. The death toll figure has crossed 12,600 as per the Gaza Health Ministry. Over 5,000 of them were children. The Israeli army released a video showing military activity in the Ramal area in Gaza City, where its forces located 35 tunnel shafts and seized a large number of weapons, ammunition, and rocket launchers. Israel has also continued with its operation at Al-Shifa hospital. It has become the center of Israel's ground offensive. Israel says the medical facility sits atop a Hamas command center. Medics say all 31 premature babies in Al-Shifa hospital have been evacuated, while the World Health Organization declared the site as a death zone.
في قلة في وجود الكادر الطبي بسبب أغلبهم إما استشهد أو تعرض لإصابات سواء من أطباء من تمريض من تخدير.
This comes after Palestinians had been given a 1-hour ultimatum to evacuate the hospital, about which Israel clarified later that no such order had been issued for the hospital. Israel also denies issuing order for evacuation in Khan Yunis in South Gaza. But amid confusion and chaos, the exodus has continued. People could be seen traveling on foot towards the south. The United Nations say some 1.6 million people have been displaced inside the Gaza Strip. This is when the population of Gaza is a mere 2.2 million.
I come from the north of Gaza at Jala Street, between Gaza City as well Jala Street. The situation is horrible, is catastrophic, it's unbelievable, it's inhumanity, fatalities in the streets, children in the streets, dying, people under rubble, shouting. The civil society cannot help them because the severe shortage of the equipment of civil society defense, civil society here. So the situation is horrible. It's genocide. It's a real catastrophe.
Many Gazans could be seen taking shelter outside a hospital in Khan Yunis amid heavy downpour of rain and strong gusts of wind. Israel says it lost 3 soldiers in the fighting in Gaza. Earlier on Saturday, over 80 had been killed in double Israel strikes at a refugee camp in Gaza. Egypt described the bombing as a war crime. The Gaza siege has also left food, water, medicine and fuel in short supply. Aid deliveries have also been hampered due to the shortage of fuel. Israel had earlier agreed to allow fuel into the besieged strip, but it is only a third of what is needed currently. Tensions are running high on the Israel-Lebanon border as well. Israel's defense forces have been exchanging fire with Hezbollah. In one of the deepest strikes inside Lebanon, the Israeli army hit a building in an industrial area on Saturday. So far, over 70 Hezbollah fighters and 10 civilians and at least 10 Israelis, most of them soldiers, have been killed. As international alarm rings out over Israel's ground advance in northern Gaza, raising international alarm, the WHO said it was developing plans for immediate evacuation of the remaining patients and staff. 31 premature babies have been evacuated from the Al-Shifa hospital on Sunday. They will be transferred to hospitals in Egypt. A United Nations team said Sunday that 291 patients were left at Gaza's largest hospital after Israeli troops had others evacuate. Now, those left included babies in extremely critical condition, trauma patients with severely infected wounds, and others with spinal injuries who are unable to move. On the 18th of November, a joint UN humanitarian assessment team led by the WHO, accessed Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza. They described the facility as a death zone. Due to time limits associated with the security situation, the team was able to spend only 1 hour inside the hospital. They assessed the situation, conducted a rapid situational analysis, and assessed medical priorities and established logistics options for further missions. According to the WHO team, the Al-Shifa hospital is unable to function like a medical facility due to the scarcity of clean water, fuel, medicine, and other essentials. The team also reported signs of shelling and gunfire and even saw a mass grave at the entrance of the hospital. The mission was assisted by the Israel Defense Forces to ensure safe passage along the agreed route. Earlier, the IDF had issued evacuation orders to the remaining 2,500 internally displaced people seeking refuge. The WHO and its partners are developing plans for immediate evacuation of the remaining patients, staff, and their families. Additional missions are being arranged to urgently transport patients from Al-Shifa to the Nasser Medical Complex and the European Gaza Hospital in the south of Gaza.
All right, to discuss matters further, next we're being joined live by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who's an international affairs analyst, a renowned author and historian, and has a clear opinion on matters from his end. We will like to speak with him next on this. Welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Doctorow. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Doctor, do you see a hostage deal in the works? As Qatar seems positive, but Israel has not confirmed it yet.
Oh, it's entirely possible. Sooner or later this will be resolved. The question is how many of the hostages will have survived while Israel continues its rampage in Gaza. But yes, some hostage exchange will take place. The details, of course, are not disclosed to us.
Doctor, now Israeli forces have released footage of a tunnel under the Al-Shifa compound, again reinforcing Israeli claims of Hamas using tunnels under hospitals, using civilians as human shields. Now, are civilian casualties an inevitable consequence of this war here? Could Israel have applied another tactic here which could have hopefully and possibly avoided the amount of deaths that we have seen in the region?
Well, I'd like to comment first on this remark that the Israelis have released footage from the CCTV that was running at the entrance to the hospital. The most important comment on that is the no comment that I saw today in the major international broadcasters, CNN and the BBC. There was no coverage whatsoever of this Israeli released footage. That is to say, these major broadcasters do not believe for a minute that this is anything other than Israeli propaganda. That may sound a bit peculiar, but let's remember that in the last 2 weeks of international broadcasting about the Gaza conflict, the Israeli spokesmen have been cross-questioned, have been interviewed by the BBC, by CNN, and these journalists have allowed the Israeli spokesmen to hang themselves. That's to say, they gave them a lot of rope, and they let them present the Israeli case to be what it is: outrageous lies and stonewalling. So the fact that these were released to social media tells us nothing. I don't believe for a minute that the Hamas would have let CCTV run during this operation. Of course, they would have closed it down. Just as when the Israelis took us into the tunnel, to the entrance of the tunnel, and brought out 11 Kalashnikovs as proof that the hospital was being used for military purposes. The journalists from these major Western broadcasters questioned them with the obvious point that what kind of a brain center of Hamas could this be with 11 Kalashnikovs, which they clearly suggested were planted by the Israeli defense forces. So what's coming out of Israel is very ugly propaganda that is being denounced most remarkably by the Western media.
So there is some kind of a disconnect there between what the leadership is saying in terms of their support for the Israeli forces, but what the media is covering in terms of what they're questioning of all that is coming out from the Israeli front. Doctor, I also wanted to get your opinion on this now. On Sunday, the Houthis claimed to have seized an Israeli cargo ship in the southern Red Sea. However, Tel Aviv has denied ownership of the vessel and said there were no Israelis among its crew either. How do you see this one panning out between Israel and Yemen?
This is child's play compared to what the Yemenis are about to do. Russian television last night, the Russian premier news program, News of the Week, was explaining that the Houthis are prepared, the Yemenis are prepared to fire missiles on merchant ships passing through the Suez Canal and or the Red Sea. In effect, while we have been talking about the risks to global fuel prices by a possible Arab boycott of Israel and or restrictions on sales to Europe, we have an imminent other threat that nobody has talked about till now. The Yemen is 30 million people. It's the poorest country in the Arab world, but it has an arms production which is formidable. And they have an arsenal of missiles that are ship sinkers. So at any moment, the Yemen can put the global logistics at great risk by sinking ships in these international waters that are used by most of the transport from Europe to the Far East and back. These are threats that no one is taking into account right now, and they are realizable threats.
Doctor, I want to slip in one last question very quickly. Now, the death toll in Gaza has gone up to 13,000. No ceasefire in sight. Israel has gone through northern Gaza already. What's the end game here? Where is it finally leading to? Is it going to be a complete siege, complete takeover?
Well, takeover is already being implemented. What is the question is the ethnic cleansing and the eviction of Palestinians. Right now, there's been discussion of the Israeli moves in the south of Gaza. Let us recall that more than 1 million Palestinians were under pressure from Israel, were evicted from the north so that they could proceed with their destruction of most of the residential housing and infrastructure. and they were told to take refuge in the south. Now, the latest developments are that Israel has said it's concentrating its next moves on the south, and it's instructed those in refugee camps to move to a limited area within the south, which the UN has said is unsupportable. So the next move that Israel would like, is very clear, would be to expel them all into Sinai. Now, this is a move that could trigger a regional war. Jordan, the most closest ally of the United States in the region, has already declared that it will open a war with Israel if they try to evict the Palestinians into Sinai. So we are not past the dangerous moments in this conflict. They are still ahead to be resolved.
The dangerous moments are still ahead to be resolved. Definitely testing times, and we're hoping that there should be peace in the region very soon. Thank you so much for joining in on the broadcast, sir. That was Dr. Gilbert Doctorow joining us right here on WION The World is One, sharing your insights on this.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, staying with updates from the Israel-Hamas war. Now, the Qatari Prime Minister has said that a deal between Israel and Hamas on return of hostages is close to fruition.
Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman has said that his confidence is growing and that a deal will be reached soon. Sheikh Mohammed said that the challenges facing the agreement are just practical and logistical.
The deal is going through ups and downs from time to time throughout the last few weeks, but I think that I'm now more confident that we are close enough to reach to a deal that can bring the people safely back to their homes, whether they are the hostages on Hamas side or whatever the exchange that will take place from the Israeli side.
This even as a member of Israel's war cabinet, Benny Gantz said that his priority is to get the hostages back. He added that Israel has decades if they needed to destroy Hamas, but the country does not have that much time to return the abducted people back home.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the White House rejected a Washington Post report which claimed that Israel, US and Hamas had reached an agreement to release the hostages. It said a deal on release of hostages would happen in exchange for a 5-day pause in fighting.
Netanyahu also said that there is no deal on the table and that he cannot elaborate further. And according to reports, Hamas is ready to release 60 to 70 hostages. They demand a 5-day ceasefire. However, Israel is against this idea, as it claims Hamas will use the ceasefire to regroup.
ونقول للاحتلال الذي تجاوزت خسائره 180 دبابة وناقلة جند وآلية عسكرية ومئات القتلى والجرحى في صفوف جنوده وضباطه خلال أسبوعين فقط. نحن لازلنا في بداية المعركة ولازلنا في أول الطريق وأول الشوط، وإن القادم بإذن الله أكبر وأعظم.
Families of the hostages continue to pile pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister for their release.
Thousands of marchers, including relatives of more than 50 hostages held by Hamas, reached the Prime Minister's office on Saturday. However, on Friday, they had embarked on their fourth leg of a 5-day walk from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and called on the Israeli government to bring some 240 hostages home. Now, the marchers traversed 70 kilometers to Netanyahu's office and urged Israel's war cabinet to do more to rescue their loved ones.
Now, early in the war, Qatar negotiated a deal with Hamas to free 2 American Israeli hostages. A few days later, the militants released 2 elderly Israeli women, but since then, nothing substantial has happened.
You go with this one? You go with this lady? Okay.
All right, to discuss matters further, joining us on the broadcast right here on World DNA from Monterey, we have Professor James A. Russell. He is an associate professor in the Department of National Security at the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have you here. Sir, the death toll has gone up to nearly 13,000. 6,000. No ceasefire in sight. Israel has gone through northern Gaza, pretty much all through the northern side of Gaza. What's the end game here? If we just take a larger picture, where is this heading? What is Israel essentially trying to achieve? And where does it go from here?
Well, I can't speak for the Israeli government, obviously, but it appears as if what we are going to be left with at the end of Israeli military operations is a completely destroyed urban infrastructure throughout Gaza, in the north and the south. If we take a look around the Middle East, for example, after the wars, so to speak, in places like Tripoli and places like Fallujah, this is what we are confronting, where we're going to have a refugee population of 2.5 million people that are going to be needing care and feeding in the winter. There's going to be no infrastructure left. It's all going to be destroyed.
And as the humanitarian crisis deepens, Mr. Russell, I'd also like to ask you, with the latest report that's come in, that the Houthis have claimed to have seized an Israeli cargo ship in the southern Red Sea. However, Tel Aviv is denying that. Now, irrespective, this does kind of pose a threat to the war turning into a wider conflict. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on it are that, as the great German war strategist Karl von Clausewitz would remind us, is that when wars kick off, they take unpredictable turns and they develop a logic all of their own. And this clearly is a case in this war, in which the Houthis, for example, have emerged as this third party that's attempting to enter the conflict. U.S. naval vessels have shot down several drones and missiles coming from the Houthis towards Israel. And this latest step by the Houthis is just another example of their attempt to enter the conflict indirectly. And I should also add that as has been reported in the press, that Iran's proxies have been shelling U.S. military installations in Syria. So the point is that once the lead starts flying, as it has been, you get into unpredictable territory and with escalation potential, and that's what we're looking at.
Professor, are civilian casualties just an inevitable, unfortunate consequence of the actions which are going on? Was there any other way Israel could have gone into Gaza and to avoid any kind of civilian casualties, because they've also released footage, what they claim is another tunnel which was right under the Al-Shifa compound, which they have been claiming about since a while. Was there a better way to do it?
No. The short answer is no. I was frankly kind of distressed to hear the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, be calling, he was calling for a more sort of selective targeting approach. And in a war like this, it's really not possible. Again, I go back to this metaphor of looking at places like Tripoli, look at places like Fallujah, look at Aleppo. These places are being blasted apart by high caliber weapons that are being fired from relatively close ranges. And who bears the brunt of all of this carnage? It's innocent civilians. I'm frankly not interested in the tunnel complex or whether it exists or doesn't. We're getting all this, sort of sports event-like reporting on it. And the bottom line is that innocent civilians are on the receiving end of indiscriminate violence that are war crimes. This is what's going on from both sides, from Hamas and from Israel.
Professor, do you see a hostage deal in the works, as Qatar seems positive, but Israel does not really seem to have confirmed it?
Well, I can only repeat to you what I read in the press about it, which is that the press reports in the Washington Post, for example, seem to indicate that, quoting Israeli sources, that there was some kind of deal that was possible. And again, this gets back to this central issue. Innocent civilians shouldn't be part of this equation. and the hostages, I understand what Hamas is trying to do here, which is to bring visibility and attention onto the plight of the Palestinians. I think they've succeeded in doing that. But the point is, I'm not sure at this point what effect can be generated by continuing to hold these hostages, which are innocent civilians. They should give them up.
All right, Professor James Russell, always a pleasure to have you here on World DNA, getting all your insights on this, and hope to speak with you soon. Thank you so much for joining in.
Israel says that Hezbollah has fired at least 1,000 munitions from Lebanon. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant blamed the group's long-time backer, Iran, for intensifying attacks against Israel. On Sunday, Israeli forces near the border reported that Hezbollah launched a series of missiles and drone attacks. According to the IDF, the projectiles landed in open areas. It added that in response, its troops targeted the Hezbollah group's position in Lebanon. Gallant called it a multi-front war, even though Israeli troops are focused on Gaza. Hezbollah has claimed that it fired anti-tank missiles at an IDF outpost near the town of Zarit. Since October 7th, Israel has reported of several attacks in its northern border, which has so far killed at least 3 Israeli civilians and 6 IDF soldiers. Reports from the Lebanese side claim that nearly 100 people have been killed.
Now, despite the fierce fighting and relentless bombardment of Gazan hospitals, the international media is reporting that a tentative deal between Israel and Hamas may be likely for an exchange of hostages for a 5-day ceasefire. More in our next report.
Fighting raged on Sunday between Hamas militants and Israeli forces in parts of North Gaza. Israel has bombarded the area with a devastating aerial blitz since Hamas's October 7 attack. Its forces say they have taken control of large areas of the north and west around Gaza City. But guerrilla-style Hamas resistance remains fierce in pockets of a heavily urbanized area. That includes parts of Gaza City and the sprawling Jabalia and beach refugee camps. Witnesses reported heavy fighting overnight between Hamas gunmen and Israeli ground forces trying to advance in Jabalia. It is the largest of the enclave's camps with nearly 100,000 people, most of whom rejected Israeli appeals to evacuate to the south. There on Saturday, civil defense forces and civilians were digging through the rubble, searching for survivors of an Israeli strike. Due to a lack of equipment, they are forced to use their hands, said one ambulance worker.
As you can see, a military bombardment hit this place, making this huge crater. Now we're standing above the rubble, where 15 people are trapped. 3 bodies were pulled out, and we are currently searching for more.
Gaza's health ministry says Israel's constant bombardment has killed 12,300 people, including 5,000 children. That's after the Hamas cross-border rampage in which around 1,200 Israelis were killed and 240 taken hostage. On Saturday, the Washington Post reported that a tentative deal had been agreed for the release of dozens of women and children hostages in exchange for a 5-day pause in fighting. This was, however, later denied by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US officials. Nevertheless, on Sunday, Qatar's Prime Minister said the main sticking points blocking such a deal were very minor and mainly practical and logistical issues.
As Israel continues its operation to wipe out Hamas, the World Health Organization has called Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, a death zone, after United Nations employees found a mass grave near Al-Shifa's entrance. Till now, the entire conflict has claimed 13,700 lives. The death toll in Gaza has climbed to over 12,300, which includes more than 5,000 children and over 3,300 women. The Hamas-run health ministry says that more than 80 people were killed in 2 separate Israeli strikes on the Jabalia refugee camp. One of the strikes targeted a UN school-turned-shelter, resulting in at least 50 deaths. A separate strike on another building killed 32 people from the same family, 19 of them children. The IDF has not commented on the strikes per se, but said that its troops were expanding operations in Gaza, including in parts of Jabalia. As per the latest reports, Israel, the United States and Hamas are working on an agreement that would free dozens of women and children held hostage in Gaza. The hostage deal will be in exchange for a 5-day pause in fighting. The release, which could begin within the next several days, could lead to the first sustained pause in conflict in Gaza. But the White House has refuted the claims of a final deal and said that it will continue to work hard toward one. The World Health Organization led an assessment mission to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City and determined it was a death zone. Now the WHO has urged for a full hospital evacuation. As per the UN's figures, 291 patients and 25 health workers remain inside the hospital. Israeli airstrikes battered the South Gazan city of Khan Yunis and killed dozens of Palestinians. Over the last night, 26 Palestinians were killed and 23 wounded by an airstrike on 2 apartments. The strike occurred in a multi-story block in a busy residential district. A third Israeli airstrike killed 15 Palestinians in a house west of Khan Yunis. As the IDF moves southward in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the military's actions and said that Israel abides by the laws of war. Earlier, he also said that the Palestinian Authority was unfit to administer the territory.
ישראל פועלת לפי דיני המלחמה. ככה עובד הצבא שלנו, הצבא המוסרי ביותר בעולם. הסיוע ההומניטרי חיוני גם להמשך הבטחת התמיכה הבינלאומית. בלי סיוע הומניטרי, גם הידידים הטובים ביותר שלנו יתקשו לתמוך בנו לאורך זמן, ויהיה לנו קשה מאוד להמשיך במלחמה עד הסוף.
Israeli forces continue to operate in the Al-Shifa hospital. Israel's chief military spokesman said that special forces are now operating in a shaft in the hospital and are locating weapons and command and control rooms.
הכוחות ממשיכים לפעול בבית החולים ב4 מאמצים מרכזיים. 1. איתור ומידע על החטופים, שזה מאמץ עליון. 2. איתור אמצעי לחימה וחדרי פיקוד ושליטה. 3. איתור מחבלים שנמצאים במרחב בתי החולים. 4. מאמץ משמעותי לחשיפת התת קרקע שמתחת לבית החולים והשמדתה.
People continue to seek refuge in the south of Gaza after patients, medical staff and civilians left the Al-Shifa hospital. People passed by on donkey carts and on foot looking for refuge and safety. Amidst the intensifying Israeli offensive, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas made a direct appeal to U.S. President Joe Biden to pressure Israel to stop its operation in the Gaza Strip.
اليوم أتوجه للرئيس الأمريكي جو بايدن الذي يتحمل دون غيره مسؤولية خاصة لما له من مكانة دولية.
And in an opinion article in the Washington Post, U.S. President Joe Biden said that the Palestinian Authority should ultimately govern the Gaza Strip and the West Bank following the Israel-Hamas war. Biden rallied behind a revitalized Palestinian Authority and a 2-state solution. Now, Jordan's foreign minister voiced doubt that Israel could reach its goal of obliterating Hamas with its heavy bombardment and invasion of the Gaza Strip. Ayman Safadi said this at the annual IISS Manama Dialogue Security Conference in Bahrain.
Let's talk more about this. Former German ambassador to NATO, Joachim Bitterlich, is joining us live from Normandy. Mr. Bitterlich has held several positions in the German government, including the role of policy advisor to former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Ambassador Joachim, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome to WION The World is One. I'll begin by asking you, how would you assess the war so far, because it's been more than a month?
Perhaps in the eyes of the Israelis, the war is too long. Should have been shorter for them, because now they are coming more and more under pressure to allow much more, let's say, in troubled, in difficult waters in that period now.
Ambassador Joachim, what do you think about Israeli forces attacking hospitals? And, you know, this is a very precarious situation because premature babies are being forced to move or to relocate to Egypt now. What would be your call to Israel when it comes to hospitals and refugee camps?
Well, the Israeli military people, the IDF, suppose that under this hospital or around this hospital there have been command structures of Hamas. And please be aware, before the war, often premature born children, babies were not brought to